Okay, so yes, so we'll continue. Um, just give a bit of space for if anybody wants to ask any questions or also to share anything, any observations about the meditation or how things have been during the week or anything you want to ask. Anybody want to comment or ask anything?
Well, I'll just say, David, that I really enjoyed that meditation. It
Good.
combined two things that I really like. It combined the visualization,
Yeah,
the taking refuge, and also the loving kindness meditation.
great.
So I really enjoyed that one. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Stuart. Yeah, good. Yeah, so the idea was, I mean, again, for the benefit of the new people, actually, rather unusually for me, for this whole term up to now, I think it's been about 8, this is about session number 8 or 9. I haven't done refuge at all. I normally always do it at the beginning of a class. And I think the reason for that is because partly, sometimes in Theravada tradition it's not done. Or in the Tibetan tradition, we always do it, but I think in a Theravada tradition, it's not always done. And there's nothing about it in the book, except when we come to this chapter that we're going to be looking at tonight, which is chapter 5. So just, I mean, I can only give the very briefest possible summary for the benefit of new people where we've come from. But just to say, as I said, the book's based on the Sutra, which is sometimes called the Sutra of the 4 Foundations of Mindfulness. Okay, and those 4 are mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the feelings, mindfulness of the state of mind, and mindfulness of the contents of the mind, if you like. So there's a section on each of those in the sutra, and then in the first and last one, they're also subdivided into different aspects of that. So under mindfulness of body, you have mindfulness of the breathing, this is the kind of main object of that you're focusing on in the formal practice. The sitting meditation practice is based on the breath, but also, to notice the rest of the things that are going on. So sometimes, we've been going into other aspects of meditation on the body, like the parts of the body, the postures of the body, impermanence, the body's always changing. And then noticing feelings, physical sensations mainly. And then state of mind, so things like, is the mind distracted or concentrated, bright or dull, excited or sleepy, etc. Just general state of mind. And then the last one contains a lot of things, everything else, if you like. For instance, the 6 senses. There's a section on the 4 noble truths. So if you like, these are, the aspect of thinking mainly. I mean, there's other things as well, but what actually goes on in the mind. Okay, so that's the general picture of what the idea is, that to retrain to be aware of everything that's going on in our inner world, as clearly as possible, and to be aware of it rather than to analyze it and think about it, just to notice what's happening. So to kind of get the thinking mind out of the way to a great extent. But when thinking arises, we notice that that's happening. So we become aware of that. Okay, does that make sense? So then the previous 4 chapters of the book, the first chapter is just talking a little bit about this general idea of mindfulness, what it is, and then second chapter a little bit more specifically 2 aspects of it. So one is really what I've just described as just noticing. It's called bare attention. So in the meditation practice particularly, we are looking to get away from the normal compulsive habit of our mind, which is always thinking about the past or thinking about the future, and we have this inner conversation which often we're not really aware of, but it goes on all the time, and it distracts us from being aware of what's actually happening in the present moment. Okay, so this bare attention is training ourselves to be simply aware of what's happening right now in me. You know, what am I experiencing right now? Noticing the sensations of the breathing, other sensations going on in the body, feelings that are happening, thoughts that are arising, emotions that are arising. So rather than getting involved in them and kind of going into a big story about them, just to notice, oh, that's irritation, or that's, you know, a pleasant feeling. Okay, so that's the bare attention. And then the other part of it is called clear comprehension. So when we're not in this formal sitting meditation practice or walking meditation, which is another way we can do the formal meditation, when we're not doing that formal meditation, in other words, all the rest of the time, the rest of the day, is to bring more attention and awareness to how we're doing things, noticing, you know, how our body is moving, what, you know, the posture of the body as we move around, noticing what is, you know, doing our action purposefully. Is this activity that I'm doing now, is this in line with my purpose in what I'm doing generally or in my life, you know? So to have that kind of reflective awareness of our own mental and physical actions. Okay, so we can train that way. You know, we can try to bring that into daily life, even if we're, you know, working or we're busy with other things. We can try to bring that awareness into life more generally, but also to allow time, you know, when we're not busy, to give more attention to that, to, right, keep reminding ourselves, oh, right, okay, is this, you know, there's this clear comprehension of purpose and clear comprehension of suitability. Is this in line with my purpose? Is this the right way to go about what I'm doing? Evaluating. So there's a clear comprehension, and these two things together make up the whole practice of mindfulness. And then in the third chapter, he goes into these four objects of the mind, body, feelings, state of mind, and contents of the mind. And then the fourth chapter, which I talked a little bit about last time, is the title of the chapter is Culture of Mind. This is translating Pali or Sanskrit term bhavana. And often, well, one of the main things this refers to is what we just did. So the meditation on loving kindness and compassion, joy and equanimity. I didn't really cover the last two so much, but these four meditations belong to this aspect of the practice called mental culture, cultivating qualities of mind, right? And he's bringing that in because it doesn't talk about it in the sutra, and he wants to emphasize that that doesn't mean that it's not important or that we should leave it out. But he's saying, you know, because the Buddha taught this in many other places, it's very clear that it's important. But this particular sutra was focusing on this training in mindfulness. So there's a little bit about that. So, and what I've been doing, actually, I realized, I hadn't actually realized this until this evening, that how I've actually been operating is that each week I've been talking about reviewing briefly what we've been doing and what we've been doing during the previous week, and then talking about the next chapter in the book, and then inviting you to and then in the next week doing a meditation on that. So inviting people to read the chapter, and then we do a meditation on it the following week. So that's what we've been doing. So last week I asked people to read this. Have I got that wrong, actually? I'm not sure. Anyway, whichever way round it is. Yeah, I think did I talk about chapter 4 last week or chapter 5? I can't remember. Either way.
You asked us to read chapter 4 this week that's just past David.
Okay.
If I'm right, Tim, so we're covering 4 today.
Okay, so you've read that chapter and we've now had a meditation on it. So those obviously who are new, you didn't read it, but hopefully that's enough of just a quick explanation. And so before we move on, just ask for any questions or any reflections on that, on the meditation that we've done, because I'm going to be suggesting continuing to do that meditation, and I'll be talking a little bit about how we can combine it with the main meditation that we've been doing, which is more the mindfulness side. So now we're bringing in the loving kindness and compassion, and we're going to combine that a little bit with the mindfulness of breathing, etc., that we have been doing. So I will talk a bit about how to combine them, but other than that, are there any questions about the practice itself of loving kindness and compassion, basically? No. Okay. Yeah. So, but I'm also going to introduce the next chapter this evening. The title of the chapter is the Burmese Satipatana method. Satipatana means foundations of mindfulness. So that's the Pali name of the sutra. It's the Satipatana Sutra. So yeah, translated Sutra on the Foundations of Mindfulness. So maybe I'll just say a few words about combining the two, and really, you can take the recording, the meditation we've just done as a basis, if you like, so you can meditate. I was quite long, so you might want to maybe do it through one more time with the recording, just to kind of internalize the meditation itself, and then do it on a daily basis. And so it's kind of the way that I do my own meditation, is that I start with a period of mindfulness and concentration. I'm going to say a little bit about the relationship between those two, which I have spoken about before in this class, but it's quite important. But, beginning with the physical relaxation, I'm more and more convinced that's extremely important. So that's why I did quite a bit on that. I did meditate for years trying to achieve concentration and mindfulness without really relaxing the body fully. And I think it's impossible. I think that physical relaxation is absolutely essential. So that's why I've put quite a lot of emphasis on it. And I think you'll find it makes the meditation, much easier, concentration. So then going into, following the breathing, initially to, the physical relaxation and kind of with natural breathing and so on, helps to calm and quieten the mind, and create a more meditative state of mind. And then using the breath as a focus takes that to the next stage. The mind becomes a little bit more calmer and more still and more centered and more focused. So from there, you can either keep going in the same direction to get greater concentration, really kind of undistracted concentration on just the pure physical sensation of the breathing is one way that you can go, okay? That's not necessarily the way that you want to go. That's one emphasis you can put onto it. The other thing that you can do is just, once the mind is fairly calm, collected, and centered, and reasonably concentrated, is just to, you can either go in turn amongst these different objects. So like, okay, now what about the rest of what's happening in the body? You know, so there's different aspects of that you can look at. The posture, noticing more clearly the way that you're kind of, you know, that your body is being held. Give attention to that. Give attention to the parts of the body, the physical sensations that are going on. Or then you could do that for a little bit, and then you could be looking at the feelings, and you could be looking at state of mind. So you could go through these four sort of aspects, these four objects of meditation. Or just keeping the breath as an anchor, right? So keeping on coming back to the breath whenever the mind starts wandering off onto a train of thought and losing the mindfulness, okay? When that happens, then come back to the breathing, reestablish a bit of concentration. But otherwise, just to watch whatever is going on, notice what's arising. Some people like to label it. Oh, that's a thought, that's a feeling, that's anger, that's love, that's a memory, that's an image coming up in my mind, you know, just a very simple one or two or few words label, not to get into analyzing it. That's another way you can do it. That's really more, I mean, that last one is more like the general method that's being suggested here, is just to, you know, the main method is to try to train ourselves to simply be aware of what is ever is arising in our experience, in all of these, you know, different aspects of it, body, feelings, mind, and emotions, really. Okay, so that's the practice in a general way, but there's very sort of detailed advice and instructions in the book on exactly how to practice in the meditation session itself and outside of that meditation session. So as I said, the formal meditation, what we call formal meditation, so is when you have your meditation time, you know, usually maybe first thing in the morning, whatever, and you sit on a cushion or you sit in a chair. You maybe do it in front of you have a shrine with a Buddha image and whatever, and that's your formal meditation. But it can also be walking meditation equally. And you can do walking meditation either, again, watching the breath, or concentrating on the movements of the feet, like, you know, touching the ground, flat on the ground, heel lifting up. You know, you can watch, sometimes there's a 3 or 6 stages of a walking step you can do. So walking slowly and noticing it, or any way you've learned to do walking meditation or sitting meditation. And so you might do, like, you know, 1 session a day of 10 minutes or 20 minutes, or you might do 2 sessions a day. You might do 1 walking, 1 sitting, whatever, you know, works for you. And then during the rest of the time, making a little bit of an extra effort to bring mindfulness, to recall the thought, oh yeah, be mindful, notice what's going on, you know, notice your breathing, for example. If you're in an interaction, communication with somebody, to kind of watch your thoughts, watch your reactions, to not get carried away by emotional reactions as much as you normally would. So just kind of just trying to up your general level of mindfulness a notch. But also what you can do is like this mini meditation. So you've got an opportunity during the day, which you may even at work, you know, you may think, oh, I've got a spare minute here where I can just watch the breath, you know. that's very, very useful, very effective to have short many sessions of meditation through the day in order to help you just keep that general level of mindfulness going. Okay. So that was just a bit of a resume of some of what we've covered up to now, partly for the benefit of new people, equally for the benefit of those who've been coming, just a reminder. And so I'm going to move on in a minute, but before I move on, just does any of that bring up any questions anyone would like to ask? Okay. So I'm going to move on now and say a little bit about the next chapter, which is the last but one chapter in the main part of the book. And the last chapter is very short, so although we will touch on that next week, but it's not as it's quite a small thing really. This is an important chapter, and so the heading is the Burmese Satipatana method, and I'll explain that in a moment. But just to say, in this chapter, there's very detailed instructions on basically how to do a retreat on this practice. Okay. So for some of you, possibly like, the winter time, sort of before, after Christmas, beginning of the new year, whatever, might be an opportunity to do some retreat. So you could do just one day or 2 days, a weekend or a week if you want, So I'm going to talk a bit about that, and obviously highly recommend it. I did think that we would have a guided retreat of a weekend, but that hasn't, I'm not sure that that is going to happen, I'm afraid. Might be possible that we'll do that. But I want to talk a bit about it so that, with the benefit of the book, if you have the book, and if you haven't got the book, I do highly recommend it. I think it is an extremely good, in my personal opinion, having read a lot of Buddhist books, I think it is really one of the best instruction books on meditation, one of the best, meditation guidebooks or handbooks that I know. So highly recommended. And anyway, if you have it or you want to get it and you're interested in doing a bit of retreat, there's good explanation in this chapter of how to do that. So, yeah, as he says, the instructions that he gives are based on a course that clearly he went on. I suspect he went on more than one, actually. He probably went on quite a few of these courses that were given by this very famous teacher called the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw's Burmese meditation master, and that's why it's called the Burmese Satipatana method. And he tells the story of how it kind of this method came into being. So this teacher, U Narada was his original name. I think he's sometimes called that as well still. He was very, very motivated, very keen to actually get the realizations. He said, well, we're in the monastery, whatever the monastery was or whatever, in the traditional practice in Burma, there's a lot of reading of the sutras and a lot of devotional practice to the Buddha, but he wasn't able to find anybody that could really teach him how to meditate. It didn't seem to be like, yeah, there was a lot in the sutras of the scriptures that we're reading about nirvana, liberation, enlightenment. We didn't really see anybody getting that. He didn't know how. Nobody seemed to be able to teach him. So he kind of went on a bit of a quest, traveled to the northern part of the country, looking for meditators who had actually got these realizations. And he was directed to one particular, hermit, somebody that was the people that in the remote part in the I don't know, mountain or area of Burma, there were some of these, you know, people who'd been meditating for many, many years, and he met with this person and asked him for advice, and he said, why do you search outside the master's word? Basically saying what you need to do is to go back to this original sutra, because everything's in there. And so you follow that advice, and, you know, obviously it seems he gained great realizations, you know, sort of, many people believe that he'd gained, you know, reached the goal of the path. In the Theravada tradition, they would say there's to be an arhat, you know, have reached nirvana. But anyway, he taught it very widely, and it, you know, became quite famous. So this author of the book, Nyanapadikathera, obviously has studied with him, and he describes what happens on one of the courses that Mahasi Sayadaw gave, which were 1 or 2 months in length. So in the chapter, he explains, you know, he says, well, you know, you're not going to get the same experience doing it by yourself, obviously. If you have an experienced teacher guiding you, and you're able to go and, you know, speak to them on a daily basis and get advice and instructions, you're going to get much deeper, much quicker. But nevertheless, he said, you know, you can do it on your own, and, you know, if you follow the instructions carefully, you will get the results. So it's there, you know. In a way, everything that he's explained up to this point, you need to kind of have digested that as well to start with. But then this gives you quite specific instructions on how to do a retreat. So, you know, you would decide on a certain number of meditation sessions each day that you're going to do. I think in, you know, sounds like the way that it was taught there, these would probably be, you know, the length of the meditation session would be decided and would be the same, would stay the same throughout the course. I don't know. That's a common way of doing a retreat. There's another way of doing it, which I heard from Alan Wallace, which sounded like a very good idea. Although this was particularly for developing shamatha, but you might find it might be advice that's helpful, is that, you know, they would, throughout this, he was talking about a 1-year shamatha retreat that he led. And at the beginning, so throughout the retreat, there was the same number of meditation sessions, but they started very short with long breaks in between. But then as the retreat progressed, the meditation sessions got gradually longer. So that's one way, you know, to, of course, if you're only doing 2 days, it doesn't make any sense. But, you know, if you're doing a week, you could think about that. If you're doing a longer retreat, I mean, the ideal length would be at least a month, of course, but even a week can be very beneficial. So that's just a thought there that you might want to, if you decide you've got the opportunity and the interest to take a week out of your life and do a retreat, which would be a wonderful thing to do, that you might start with, you know, whatever is comfortable, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with. But as you go through the week, you might be doing half a dozen sessions. And as you go through the week, they might get longer and you're spending more of your day meditating. It's just a thought. But basically, yeah, you're doing, and you decide also if you want to do some walking meditation as well as sitting meditation. So another way that you can do is do 10 minutes sitting, 10 minutes walking, 10 minutes sitting, 10 minutes walking. You might do that for an hour, because there's less, you know, less tiring than just doing one thing for an hour. So you might be able to do a longer session doing alternating walking and sitting, you know, just some ideas there. But the important thing would be to have a regular routine. And then in between the meditation sessions, it's an opportunity to practice what he calls general mindfulness, you know, that not what you do during the formal meditation session, but what you do with your mind the rest of the time. If you've taken a week or a day or a couple of days, as retreat, then obviously what's important beforehand is that you arrange things so that you can do that as much as possible without interruption, without having to answer phone calls or deal with business or social occasions, whatever. You want to kind of say, right, I'm going to be on retreat, maybe just for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever you can manage. And all of those things are out of the picture, hopefully, as much as possible. Then you can actually work on and practice, like wherever you go, you're walking, walk mindfully. Whatever you do, you're doing the washing up. You're paying attention to what you're doing rather than thinking about the next thing that you have to do, and if you do any reading at all, I would suggest only read this book during the retreat, no other books. On the courses, obviously, then there's no reading or writing. But I would suggest if you want to do retreat, and I'm talking at some length about this because, I understand that you may well not be able to do this, and there's no requirement. I can't require you to do anything, actually. but I am making it as a recommendation. If the opportunity is there, and you want to get the maximum, benefit from this course, from this part of the course, then if you can arrange to do a retreat of 1 or 2 days or a week or even 2 weeks, then I encourage that. I encourage you to do that if you can. Obviously, it's totally up to you if you have that motivation or not. And I hope that you will have some questions about that. Because if you're thinking about doing it, then there might well be questions that would arise. So let me just give some space for questions. If anyone has any questions about that or anything else. If no questions, I'll carry on just briefly, and then we might go into little groups as we usually do. And one of the comments that he makes actually is that, and this is the first time it's been mentioned, is a recommendation to begin the practice with taking refuge. So that's what we did this evening. And as I said, that's what I would normally do, because normally I'm teaching something from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and that's what we always do. Okay. Yeah, I've got a message in the chat to put the name of the book. I will put that in the chat. Yeah, that's the book. Oh, sorry. I've just that message was from Beth, and I've just put it to Beth, but I'll put it to everybody as well. Okay. Right. Yeah. So I was saying. So the way that I led that in the meditation this evening is the way that I normally do it in my daily practice or in my teaching. And that is, I mean, all teachers develop their own particular variant, but it's basically is the way that it's taught within the Tibetan tradition, is to, you know, visualizing the Buddha in front in that way. And you know, to think of it as that he's actually there, and you are taking refuge directly from the Buddha, and there is a validity to that. I'll be talking about that more actually next term, because next term what I'm going to be doing, so from January through to the beginning of March, I think. Unfortunately, I have some classes that I have to attend on a Thursday in March. So we're only going to have 8 weeks next term. I'm thinking about actually changing the schedule and doing 2 terms on this next book. The next book is a book called Training the Mind in the Great Way, and it's by the first Dalai Lama. And this is based on the main Tibetan system of meditation. So we've had the Theravada tradition, now we have the Tibetan tradition. But actually I should say it's based on the 2 main systems of meditation in the Tibetan tradition, because it combines 2 different aspects of the practice. They both were taught by a very great teacher called Atisha, Lama Atisha, in the 11th century, end of the 11th century. One is the what's called in Tibetan Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, graduated path to enlightenment, other translation. And the other one is in Tibetan Lojong, which means something like training the mind, or literally means changing the mind. Okay. So he taught both of these, and the purpose is the same. So these are both the Mahayana aspect, really emphasizing this motivation of compassion for all beings, and therefore wishing to attain the highest possible state of enlightenment, the same as a Buddha, in order to be able to free everyone, all beings, from suffering. So this verse that I recited, of taking refuge and generating bodhicitta, generating the mind of enlightenment, the compassionate intention to become a Buddha. This is from the Tibetan tradition. So I'll be talking more about that and why, how we do that visualization and why it makes sense to say the Buddha is actually there, even though we think, oh, I'm just imagining that he's there. Yeah. But actually, well, I'll go into that. I won't go into that now. But you can trust that he's there. Actually makes the meditation more powerful. And then receiving the blessings is also very nice. And so then you do that to kind of, inspire and energize and bring a good motivation and a good energy to the practice. This is very, very beneficial, very helpful to do that practice of taking refuge. And then here, if we do have this, this sense of wanting to follow a Mahayana path, then we can do the other 2 lines, the second part of the bodhicitta. Mind of enlightenment is called. Okay. Yeah, so he explains, like here in this retreat, this sort of general mindfulness which is what we're doing outside of the formal meditation, is really much deeper than it would be in ordinary daily life when we've got our job or our family, taking our attention. You can go much more deeply into it. So you might be whatever you're going from one place to another, you might be walking quite slowly and really noticing you're walking, noticing everything that's going on in your mind. So you can't be as completely concentrated as you can in a sitting meditation, but you can bring a much higher level of general awareness of your experience. If you're in a retreat where you don't have to be doing business with people, interacting with other people and thinking about, complicated, busy stuff. Right. I think that's pretty much all I want to say about that. If there are no further questions. Oh, yes. I'm just going to say very little bit about the end of the chapter here, which I've mentioned before, so I won't speak for very long about it. But there was this question about the relationship between and the difference between mindfulness, which is we call sati or satipatana. The word mindfulness is a translation of the Pali word sati or the Sanskrit word smrti, which actually means to remember. Yeah. So it's kind of remembering. Then it's slightly, the meaning slightly segued into being aware of what's happening now. But in the meditation, it's also about remembering the instruction of the meditation. Oh, I'm supposed to be watching the breathing. So you come back to the breathing, right? Anyway, so well, I was confused about this for a long time, because sometimes, this Theravada meditation system was called shamatha meditation, and sometimes it was called vipassana meditation. And in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, those two words are they're quite clearly differentiated. So shamatha meditation, which is concentration meditation, is basically all it means is keeping the mind on one object as far as possible without any distraction. And vipassana meditation, the Tibetan tradition, is analytical meditation, where you are trying to understand the nature of something. So, you're meditating on impermanence or emptiness, non selflessness or non-inherent existence, or whatever, however you, are familiar with that term. But the kind of real deep nature of reality, if you like, or the nature of the self, selflessness. So that would be how would we understand vipassana. But in the Theravada tradition, it seemed like, they're teaching the same thing. And some people call it shamatha and some people call it vipassana. So I was trying to understand. And when I came back and reread this book after many years in order to prepare for this course, I realized he gives a very clear explanation of that. And I found it very helpful. So when we do the meditation practice, generally speaking, the only object of meditation that, not all the time, but mostly, and especially in the retreat, actually, the only thing that we're consciously, deliberately meditating on is the breathing. Okay. We are, whenever we find that the mind's got distracted, we bring it back to the breathing. Of course, it does get distracted. And so while we're doing that, we also notice, oh, it's got distracted. That was a thought, or we may notice a feeling, So we are kind of keeping our awareness a little bit open to notice whatever is going on. But the breath, concentrating on the breath, following the breath, is kind of like an anchor to keep our mind centered. It's not the main purpose to be purely concentrated on the breathing and to kind of screen everything else out. So if we were doing shamatha, that would be our ultimate goal, is that we'd only be aware of that sensation of the breath. We'd be aware of anything else, right? Pure concentration on one object. But here we're wanting to establish a degree of concentration on that sensation of breath to keep our mind centered and to have an anchor to bring it back to, but at the same time, to just generally be aware of things as they arise in our mind. Okay, does that make sense? want to pause there because maybe people have questions about that and how it's been in your practice. But I found it very helpful. And he says this meditation, we call it Satipatana, but he says, amongst that kind of distinction of shamatha versus vipassana, this is vipassana. So actually, yes, we're training to be aware of everything as it arises. And the purpose of that is through this kind of non-judgmental awareness. We're not kind of deliberately analyzing and investigating and rationalizing what's going on. We're just trying to notice what's going on and observe it. But through that neutral observation of whatever is arising in our experience, we naturally gain insight. Vipassana means insight. We naturally gain insight into its nature. We begin to experience directly the fact that it is impermanent, the fact that it is in the nature of suffering, the fact that it is without an essence or without a self. Okay, so these basic truths about the nature of our experience and our being, we come to know them directly, but not through a conceptual thought. We just observe them. Yes, Dawn, please.
Can I ask a question, David? Do you know Alan Wallace's teachings on shamatha, and he moves the object, doesn't he, to I think you've got stabilizing the mind, like the object is a sensation in the bodies, and then the breath, as you've just described. But he moves on to use mind and content, and then awareness itself.
Right.
And I think awareness itself, I can kind of see that is still shamatha, isn't it? Because you're not opening that up to include all experience. You're trying to keep your focus quite focused.
Yes.
But mind and its content,
right.
because the content is kind of sensory experiences often, isn't it? And
a lot of things,
what is our life if it's not all sensory experiences? So I'm sort of just trying to tidy up in my head what is vipassana and what is shamatha within mind, its content, is object.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Yes. Okay. And we had a bit of a discussion about this earlier. I mean, one thing that I would say is that if you take, for example, the Four Noble Truths, which is part of that, the contents of the mind, then you wouldn't be able to jump straight into shamatha on that, because initially it's a very complicated thing. It's a conceptual thought which has many parts to it. So you would have to do analytical meditation initially. But as you do that, and then you would kind of probably focus in on a particular aspect. So you might be focusing on the third noble truth. Okay, cessation of suffering, what is that? And you're analyzing it until you get a very clear sense of insight, if you like. You get kind of you mentally feel you've got a handle on the essence of what that is. Or maybe that's perhaps a bit of a difficult example. We don't want to think we can think that, but like, if we cause of suffering, okay, so okay, I'm thinking about the cause of suffering, how suffering arises, and I'm focusing on craving. What's craving? So I'm analyzing it, but then I might get a very clear perception. It's a mental perception, okay, of craving. The mind is focused on, this is craving. I've got a sense of the essence of what craving is. And then that can be pure shamatha, okay? Stop analyzing and just soak the mind in that awareness of the nature of craving. That can be shamatha meditation. And that's actually, that aspect is quite emphasized in the Tibetan tradition, that we do analytical meditation till we penetrate to the essence of something, and then we lock onto that. And we soak our mind in that understanding that we've gained through analysis. And then we're stopping, we're not doing analysis while we're doing that. And then that concentration then may kind of weaken a little bit, and we've not got, and then we do a bit more analysis to bring it back. When the concentration gets weaker, we reinforce it with the analysis. So that's one method within the Tibetan tradition. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. You've reminded me. I think it was Mary that was talking about, you know, if you see craving, for example, you focus on that. If you start to analyze, and analyzing is the object, and then if you start to analyze, and that's your object, rather than getting caught up in the thinking or the craving or the analyzing.
Right.
It's tricky.
It is tricky. Yeah, it is tricky. But in a way, you know, there is quite a clear principle there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite a simple idea, isn't it? But when you're doing it, it's tricky.
Just take practice, because it's not easy. No, it's not. But I think if we have that, it's very helpful to clarify these points so that then we don't just get kind of completely stuck. Yeah. Thank you, Dawn. That's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah, so he says a bit more about this, quite interesting in the chapter, but I won't go into any more detail now. It's just past 8, so I'd like to sort of put you in groups for a bit, if that's okay. How many people have you got? There's 7. Okay, right. Yeah, so I'm going to put you into 3 groups. So there'll be one group with 3. I think that's inevitable with Isabel and St. John on the same screen, so which is fine. So what I'd like you to talk about, and there might be a bit of freedom of choice here, might depend on you, but if you think you might consider doing some retreat, you could discuss with each other, you know, what might help to clear the ground to be able to do it, or you might want to explore whether it is appropriate or whether it's possible for you at the moment. Okay. And it's very helpful, I think, to, you know, discuss with other people, well, how could I make this work? What's going to be getting in my way? How can I deal with that? Or, you know, you may feel that's not available, but what, in the same spirit, you know, what could help to free up time and space to do the practice a bit more, or what might remove any sort of obstacles or anything that you're finding difficult. I know if you're coming in for the first time, it will be more about, oh, how might I enter into this practice? You know, what might be helpful. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. So I'm gonna, in a second, put you into breakout rooms. And